on the tip of my spear.
That's a horsehair worm. And yes, they can live inside the human, specifically in your kidneys. We should all be parasite cleansing at least 3 to 4 times.
So I actually want to be pretty sensitive about this topic because it's something that I understand a little too well. So if you want to skip the preamble and go straight to the worm stuff, skip to this time. None taken. There is a large portion of the internet that, because of the show Monk, think that OCD is organization and germophobia. I am someone who had such textbook and severe OCD that I was diagnosed at 7 years old. Okay, single digit age. That's how clinical it was. I have never once been afraid of germs. I am actually pretty disorganized. I lose stuff all the time. And none of my art is hung straight on the walls. OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's very easy and common for an OCD obsession to be health related because health is a big source of anxiety for, I think, everyone. It's very scary to think or find out that something is wrong with you. OCD latches onto that for many people with it. Thinking that there is something wrong with you can very easily become an obsession and a cyclical thought that you cannot let go of, right? Like that's the obsessive. And then you feel like you need to act on it, and that's the compulsive. And usually the compulsion is a little more abstract, right? Like I think that I have to set my water bottle down 3 times on the left side of my desk or else I'll have a heart attack. If I get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, on the way back, I have to take exactly 9 steps back, or else I think I'll stop breathing in my sleep. But sometimes the obsession and the compulsion or the ritual can become a little more related. Sometimes it can become, if I don't drink this parasite cleanse every Wednesday, my kidneys will fail. When you're in what I call an OCD spiral, which I'm sure is like not the clinical word for it, it can become very hard when you're deep in that to differentiate between what is a real life necessity and what is a compulsion. And oftentimes, like you'll still know that it's just a compulsion, but you can't entirely convince your brain that sometimes because you have OCD. And OCD is not the only mental health affliction that can lead you down the path of buying a parasite cleanse. And in addition to that, OCD is usually paired with something else. It's usually not like a loner. But as someone who has had the intrusive and obsessive health anxiety that can very often come with OCD, and as someone who has ended up in OCD ritual loops of alternative health, I know how isolating and painful it is to be a person who follows and believes or wants to believe people like this woman. OCD has an attempted suicide rate of up to 27% in some studies. And luckily, I also know how much better it is on the other side of getting help for that. Life is so much freer when you learn to control and turn down that part of your brain. And that's not to say that you're crazy if you think this stuff. You do still have something going on that can be treated. It's just probably not a parasite. So if you have been to the doctor, multiple doctors, and they're all telling you like, no, there's not something physically wrong with you, please consider seeing a mental health professional because you can be helped. People do want to help you, and you are worth receiving that help. There are a lot of professionals who can help you and want to help you. So please seek them out genuinely from someone who had to. Mental health monologue over. Let's talk about worms. Now, horsehair worms in particular have been evolving for millions of years to parasitize arthropods. So crustaceans, insects, arachnids, amblypogids, those guys. I can never say that. I literally have one and I can't pronounce it. How stupid is that? And here is how that has affected their biology and why it is incompatible with our biology. Let's start with their life cycle. They have 4 general life stages: egg, pre-parasitic larva, parasitic larva, and free-swimming adults. Now, what's interesting about them is that they often require 2 hosts to complete their life cycle. Not always, but we'll get into that. So horsehair worm conception begins at an orgy. It's called a Gordian knot, and it's literally a ball of anywhere from a few adult horsehair worms to over 100 just going to town on each other. I'm not a kink shamer, but it's pretty gross. There are distinct males and females. They're not hermaphrodites. Unlike segmented worms and flatworms, a lot of worms in those groups are hermaphroditic, but horsehair worms are a part of the family Nematomorpha. Sure. Which is closely related to nematodes, and most but not all of the species that fall under nematodes do have distinct sexual characteristics, males and females. So what happens is a free-swimming adult horsehair worm lays eggs in water. A small aquatic animal such as a dragonfly nymph, a small crustacean, a mayfly nymph, or even a tadpole sometimes ingests that egg. The egg will then develop into a pre-parasitic larva and encase itself in what's called a cyst. It's not a cyst like what we think of in human biology and medicine. A cyst in this context is more like a cocoon or a pupal case. It kind of goes dormant and protects itself from its environment while it's waiting for the right host. So when they are a cyst / pre-parasitic larva, they're not actually taking anything from the host. This is called a paratenic host, which is pretty much a host that a parasite uses as an Uber, not a feeding or breeding ground. So they're not developing in there, they're not taking anything away from them, they're not using their nutrients, they're not eating them, nothing. They're just waiting for this host to be eaten by a larger one. However, because this is biology, there's 1,001 exceptions to everything. Sometimes the pre-parasitic larva can form cysts on plants instead of in a host, where it will once again wait to be consumed by a detrivore like a millipede, a cricket, a roach, an isopod, etc., and then wait for that detrivore to be consumed by an insectivore, but an arthropod insectivore, not like an anteater or some shit like that. That wouldn't work. We're talking like a mantis, scorpion, tarantula, spider, amblypogid, etc. Additionally, if the egg is eaten by something big enough, like a large cockroach, then they are able to complete all of their life stages in there. It just kind of depends on what eats them first. So their big host is called their developmental host, but it's not technically their definitive host because they still don't reproduce in there. Remember, they only reproduce in the orgy underwater. They don't reproduce inside of the host. Biologists love to argue, so what kind of host should we call that? I don't know. You tell me. Start a fight in the comments about it. I don't give a shit. The point is, once they realize that they're in a big enough bug, everything kicks off. The pre-parasitic larva will parasitize the large enough arthropod, stealing all of their nutrients to grow themselves. Do you want to know how they do that? Because it's really weird. They do it by boring through the host's digestive tract, attaching somewhere in the open body cavity, and absorbing their fat deposits and any nutrient stores present in their hemolymph. Hemolymph is insect blood. More on that later. Notice how I said absorbing and not eating. The horsehair larva doesn't actually have a mouth in a traditional sense. It does have a mouth-ish part, which is made up of tiny little hooks that it will use to bore and anchor itself, but it's not eating with that. It's eating by absorbing nutrients through its skin. And this is purposeful because if the larva directly attacked the arthropod's organs, the host would die before the larva was able to reach its adult form. It takes a parasitic larva a number of months to actually reach adulthood, so they can't kill their host too soon. And the horsehair worm needs its host to take it to water so it can expel itself from the host and go reproduce. So it needs to keep the arthropod alive until it is ready to exit. Now, when that does happen, when the worm is ready, it will force its way out of the arthropod whenever the arthropod is near or in water. Sometimes they will be able to go out the butt, and other times they will just full alien themselves out of the host. That's really great. That's really cool. Isn't it? Isn't that fun? Don't you love nature? Okay. Now, initially, it was believed that this was pretty much an opportunistic process, but there have been some studies that suggest that they actually use a form of genetic mind control, specifically with mantises via something called horizontal gene transfer, which pretty much allows the worm to manipulate the host's proteins to get the host to drown itself so that they can go full alien. So how do they know? How does a pre-parasitic horsehair worm larva know to develop into their parasitic larval form and start chowing down? That's because of the chemical markers present in hemolymph. So let's talk more about hemolymph like I said we would earlier. So insects don't have a bloodstream like we do. They don't have veins and arteries. They have what's called an open circulatory system where the hemolymph just kind of flows into any open cavity in their body. It's described as their hemolymph bathes their organs, to give you an idea. On top of that, their hemolymph, which again is their blood, does not carry oxygen. Their organs are delivered oxygen through a tracheal system, which is, in short, a bunch of little fucking tubes. And when I say little, I mean like microscopic, which is a bunch of tiny tubes everywhere, oxygenating their cells. Their hemolymph is also made up of different types of cells than our blood is. They don't have red and white blood cells, they have hemocytes. There's a lot of different kinds of hemocytes, but their main purposes are immune defense, similar to white blood cells, prohemocytes, which are essentially stem cells, kind of, clotting during an injury, and moving nutrients around, as well as storing fat. So it's similar to what our blood does, but it acts very differently, and it uses different types of cells to achieve those actions. Hemocytes are a very fun thing to read or watch videos about, and I definitely recommend that rabbit hole, but this video is about horsehair worms, not hemocytes. So the point is, pre-parasitic horsehair worm larva knows when it has been ingested by a suitable host because they have something called chemoreceptors, which are tiny little organs that detect certain chemicals, and they have adapted to use those chemoreceptors to detect the appropriate hemolymph, or chemical markers within the hemolymph. Same idea. So short answer, they smell the right blood, they bore out of the digestive tract, and then they absorb as many nutrients as they can with their weird little worm skin. Isn't that lovely? Now, what's interesting about that, though, is remember, like I mentioned, a lot of hemocytes are used for immune defense. So why don't the host hemocytes recognize the larva once it goes from its pre-parasitic cyst to its parasitic larval form? This goes back to the mind control thing, where what the scientists studying this are finding is that a lot of the genes between the horsehair worm's parasitic larva and the host that it infects are shared and hijacked. So not only is that part of the way probably that they're able to do the whole mind control thing, but it's also how they are able to hide themselves from the arthropod's immune defense. The immune responsible hemocytes are not able to recognize the parasitic larva as a foreign invader parasite because its genetic makeup is too close to the host. So that is the life cycle of a horsehair worm, okay? Egg goes to pre-parasitic larva inside of a parotenic host. Parotenic host gets eaten by the developmental host. Worm bores out of digestive tract, absorbs the blood, mind controls the little motherfucker to go drown itself, and then explodes out of its body and goes and finds an orgy. The circle of life. So what happens if you eat it? If you follow me on TikTok, you know that I've eaten some weird shit before. And I'll fucking do it. I'll do it. I'll eat the horsehair worm on camera, 4K. I will fucking do it. If a human ingests an egg or a pre-parasitic larva, you will not be infected because you don't have hemolymph or hemocytes. You have blood and red and white blood cells, which do not have the chemical markers necessary to trigger the pre-parasitic larva to develop into a parasitic larva. Now, what happens if you ingest a parasitic larva? I'll fucking do it. You still won't be infected because they can't eat you for the same reason. You have blood, not hemolymph. They can't absorb blood. They can only absorb hemolymph because they evolved to do that for like millions of years. Additionally, you are not very genetically similar to a horsehair worm. So your body will identify it as a foreign invader. Thank your white blood cells, you will either puke or shit your brains out. Either way, it's gonna come out. Now, if you ingest an adult horsehair worm, you definitely won't be infected, and this part is kind of fun. At the adult stage, a horsehair worm doesn't even have a fucking digestive system. They follow silk moth rules where the adult final form lives entirely off of energy reserves that were consumed during their larval phase. Their only adult purpose is to fuck something and die. They're not even looking to parasitize something anymore. They're literally trying to get out of the host so that they can go host an orgy. Once again, you're either going to vomit or shit it out. It's not, no. Other fun reasons they can't parasitize us. Temperature. Arthropods are cold-blooded. We are too hot for them. They don't want to be in here. It's not right. It's too hot in there. Also, our stomach acid is very different from that of an arthropod's. So most insects, at least, have something called a midgut, which is their equivalent of a stomach. Quick reminder on pH, 0 to 14, 7 is neutral, 14 is basic, 0 is acidic, okay? Acidic's down here, basic is up here, 7 is neutral. Water is usually around 7, right? Our stomach environment is very acidic because we have stomach acid. The pH of a human stomach is usually like 2 or 3. An insect's midgut usually has a pH around 10, so their digestive system starts out very basic. So the horsehair worm egg and preparasitic larva and cyst evolved to survive through a basic digestive tract, not an acidic one. So our stomach acid will kill the larva because they have that very absorptive skin. They're gonna get fried. They're gonna get fried in there. It's like that fucking scene from Breaking Bad or whatever. That's what's gonna happen to the horsehair worm if you eat it when it's a baby. God damn. Okay. Now, an adult horsehair worm might be able to survive human stomach acid, but you're still going to end up either shitting or puking it out because, once again, their adult form needs to reproduce before it can lay eggs. They are not hermaphrodites. They cannot fertilize themselves. There has to be another worm for it to be able to lay eggs. And it can't do that in your stomach. Even if it did, like even if you ate one right as it was fucking laying eggs, their earlier stages are still killed by human digestive enzymes. And even if somehow they weren't killed by your digestive enzymes, they still wouldn't be able to develop because, once again, you have blood, not hemolymph. They don't have anything to eat inside of you. So you're not going to get colonized by horsehair worms. They literally can't do that. I cannot stress it enough that it is literally not possible. So like I said before, if you are worried that there is a worm living in your kidneys, go to a doctor because there are human parasites that can infect kidneys. Apparently, there's something called a giant kidney worm. A quick Google search told me that there's been less than 50 cases of it in the last century. But shit, if you're worried about it, okay, go to a doctor. They can help you. I'm sure they can help you. But it's not going to be a parasite cleanse from TikTok Shop. It's just not. And it's not going to be a horsehair worm because those you'll shit out before you even know you ate it, probably. So, hope you like this video. Okay, bye.